Gentlemen, thanks so much for being here. Let's begin the debate.
President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump faced off on June 27th in the first presidential debate of the 2024 campaign.
I think it was the most memorable presidential debate I've ever seen. Unfortunately for President Biden, it was memorable because of his disastrous performance.
WSJ's Damian Paletta breaks down the debate and how the candidates' performances could affect the election. From the moment he started with his opening statement, President Biden sounded hoarse and quiet.
We got to take a look at what I was left when I became president, what Mr. Trump left me. We had an economy that was in free fall. The pandemic was so badly handled. Many people were dying. All he said was, it's not that serious. Just inject a little bleach into your arm. You'll be all right.
He was unsteady from the beginning. He seemed very uncertain in his answers to questions. There were times when he couldn't even finish a sentence, and he seemed unsure of what he wanted to say.
Now you're in a situation where there are 40% fewer people coming across the border illegally. That's better than when he left office. And I'm going to continue to move until we get the total ban on the total initiative relative to what we're going to do with more border patrol and more asylum officers.
President Trump?
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence. I don't think he knows what he said either.
The Wall Street Journal reported recently that there were a number of private incidents at the White House where people had witnessed Biden showing signs of slipping. And we used numerous specific examples of what people saw, people from across the political landscape, and how they had seen him starting to age more aggressively, especially when they were talking about important policy discussions like the debt ceiling and the war in Ukraine. There have been numerous occasions where President Biden seemed a little unsure in public. So with all those things kind of hanging in the air, President Biden really needed to deliver a strong performance to show that that was not who he was, that the President Biden we saw just a few months ago at the State of the Union, who was full of vigor and energy, that kind of person was the person who was running for president.
The state of our union is strong and getting stronger.
We just did not see that during the debate. We are now going to be having a much different conversation as a country heading into the Democratic convention about whether he should be on the ticket, whether he can compete for the presidency. They still have time, but it's the last thing that Biden needed was this debate.
For his part, Trump was a slightly more subdued version of his usual self.
Trump was Trump. He answers questions that he wants to hear, not questions that he gets asked.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says he'll only end this war if Russia keeps the Ukrainian territory it has already claimed and Ukraine abandons its bid to join NATO. Are Putin's terms acceptable to you?
First of all, our veterans and our soldiers can't stand this guy. They can't stand him. They think he's the worst commander-in-chief, if that's what you call him.
Trump continued his penchant for spreading falsehoods and exaggerations.
We now have the largest deficit in the history of our country under this guy.
Even though he, exaggerated certain things, it was kind of effective. It was very consistent with the Trump that everybody knows.
If I'm given another 4 years, I will be the best. I think I'll be the best. Nobody's ever created an economy like us. Nobody ever cut taxes like us.
We were all watching to see if he would be more combative and try to bend the rules and interrupt. He didn't really do that at all. He didn't argue with the moderators. He kind of stayed out of Biden's way. Trump wanted Biden to talk as much as possible. No one's going to remember this debate for the policies. They're only going to remember the debate for one thing, and that was how poorly Biden performed. And there's conversations happening as we speak about whether or not he can stay on the ticket and whether or not he can actually be the Democratic candidate for president in November. That's a shocking thing to think, and that's a thing a few days ago people mostly thought is unfathomable, but that's a conversation that's happening right now all across the country.
With the Democratic National Convention scheduled for August and the election still several months out, there is room for Biden to maneuver.
So the question is, can Biden put himself back together again and convince voters that he deserves to be on the ticket, or did he sort of just doom his chances in the debate?